Imagine, if you will, promising to send British troops to Ukraine while simultaneously running the Ministry of Defence on what essentially amounts to pocket change and good intentions. That is precisely what Sir Keir Starmer has done, and legendary broadcaster Andrew Neil has absolutely obliterated him for it. Neil, a man who has spent decades eviscerating politicians with a kind of surgical precision that would make a Harley Street surgeon jealous, has called this move a purely performative gesture and warned of a national scandal brewing in our defense spending. Picture this. The Prime Minister stands up, chest puffed out, declaring Britain will place boots on the ground in Ukraine, sounding all Churchillian and heroic, whilst behind the curtain our armed forces are being starved of the funding they desperately need. It is like promising to build someone a mansion whilst handing them a hammer, 3 nails, and a packet of chewing gum. Welcome back to British Mirror, where we expose a spectacular gap between political promises and actual reality. Quick favor, if you are absolutely loving this breakdown of political theatre, smash that subscribe button right now. Over 94% of you have not done it yet. It is completely free, takes literally 1 second, and honestly means a world to us. Cheers if you did. Right, back to watching Andrew Neil dismantle Labour's defence policy like a master craftsman taking apart a shoddy piece of flat-pack furniture. Let us start with what actually happened here, because the sequence of events is genuinely remarkable. On Tuesday, Sir Keir Starmer made a big announcement. Britain, he declared, would commit to putting UK forces on the ground in Ukraine alongside French troops as part of peacekeeping efforts once a deal is reached with Russia. Military hubs in Kiev, he said, British and French cooperation. It all sounds very grand, very serious, very Britain standing up for democracy and freedom. The sort of announcement that plays well in headlines and makes the Prime Minister look statesmanlike on the international stage. There is just one absolutely massive problem with this commitment, and Andrew Neil spotted it immediately. You cannot credibly promise to deploy significant military forces when you are simultaneously running the defense budget on fumes and broken promises. Andrew Neil did not hold back. Writing on X, formerly Twitter, he delivered the kind of scathing assessment that makes political advisors break out in cold sweats. He said Starmer was committing to deploy British boots on the ground with a military he does not really have because he is starving it of funds. That is not a gentle criticism. That is not a minor policy disagreement. That is Andrew Neil calling out the Prime Minister for what he sees as dangerous, hypocritical nonsense. And when Andrew Neil comes for you, he comes armed with facts, figures, and a withering tone that could strip paint off a battleship. Let us look at the numbers, because they are genuinely shocking when you consider the context. Defence spending in 2024 to 2025 was £60.2 billion. Sounds like a lot, right? Except when you adjust for inflation and look at real-term spending, it becomes far less impressive. This year, defence spending sits at £62 billion in real terms. Next year, 2026 to 27, it will be £63.5 billion. Those increases, as Neil pointed out, are peanuts. Absolutely minuscule when you consider we are living through what many analysts consider the most dangerous geopolitical period since the Cold War. We have got Russia invading Ukraine, China flexing its muscles in the Pacific, instability across the Middle East, and our response is to increase defense spending by amounts so small they barely keep pace with inflation, let alone address the actual threats we face. Here is where it gets properly damning. Andrew Neil compared current spending increases to what Britain did in the 1930s. Yes, the 1930s, when we had Neville Chamberlain and his appeasement policy towards Nazi Germany, arguably one of the most criticized approaches to national defense in British history. And even those appeasement leaders increased defense spending by far more than the current Labour government is doing when faced with rising threats. Let that sink in for a moment. We are doing worse than the government that gave us peace for our time and a piece of paper from Munich. That is not just bad. That is historically, spectacularly, embarrassingly inadequate. When your defense spending strategy makes 1930s appeasement look proactive, you have got serious problems. Neil went further. He pointed out that these projected increases could not possibly sustain a major UK deployment in Ukraine. So Starmer's grand announcement about putting boots on the ground, it is hollow. It is empty rhetoric. Neil suspects, and this is absolutely delicious political analysis, that Starmer only agreed to this deployment because he thinks Russia would never accept it anyway. meaning there will be no peace deal, and therefore no actual deployment required. It is theatre, pure political theatre designed to make Britain look tough and committed on the world stage without actually having to back it up with real resources or real risk. It is a geopolitical equivalent of writing a check you know will never be cashed because the bank account does not even exist. And here is where the contradiction becomes absolutely glaring. At the same time as promising military deployments and talking tough about international security, where's Labour actually spending money? Welfare. Massive increases in welfare spending that dwarf the pathetic rises in defense. Now, nobody is saying welfare spending is bad. Social safety nets matter. But when your increases in welfare spending are far, far greater than increases in defense spending during a period of grave geopolitical threats, as Neil put it, your priorities are clearly out of whack. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot present yourself as a serious player in international security while simultaneously refusing to actually fund your military properly. Andrew Neil also made a point of praising John Healey, the Defense Secretary, calling him a patriot who believes in the defense of the nation, and saying Healey needs to make his voice heard. That is significant. Neil is essentially saying that within Labour's own cabinet, there is someone who understands how serious the situation is, but that person is being overruled or ignored by the wider government spending priorities. It is a subtle but devastating critique. Neil is suggesting that the sensible voices within Labour are being drowned out by a leadership more concerned with political optics than actual national security. Healey knows what the military needs. He presumably understands the threats Britain faces. But he is stuck in a government that would rather spend money elsewhere and make grand but empty international commitments instead of doing the hard, expensive work of properly funding defense. Keir's got a very clear vision for making sure that people can really deal with the cost of living, that public services will get back on their feet, and is building a Britain that is tolerant, that is open, that is confident in itself, and that is really about renewal and investment in young people, as opposed to the division and the decline of the opposition. Now, that's a lovely soundbite. It ticks all the boxes. Vision, tolerance, renewal, investment. But the problem is, it sounds like exactly the kind of thing a political operative would say when they are desperately trying to spin a disaster into something manageable. Because out in the real world, at places like Ally Pally, people aren't buying it. And here's the thing about these Dutch chants. They're not organized political protests. There's no campaign group behind this. No one's handing out flyers or coordinating on WhatsApp groups. This is organic, spontaneous public anger. These are regular people, many of whom probably voted Labour in the last election, who've decided that Starmer has let them down. And they're expressing that frustration in the most British way possible, by taking the piss out of him at a sporting event. It's the modern equivalent of being pelted with rotten vegetables in the town square. And for Starmer, that should be terrifying. Because if you've lost the darts crowd, you've lost Middle England. You've lost the working-class voters Labour desperately needs to hold on to. You've lost the people who gave you a massive parliamentary majority and expected you to deliver real, tangible change. There's also something deeply symbolic about this happening at the darts. Darts isn't football. It's not rugby. It's not a sport associated with hooliganism or political extremism. It's darts. It's one of the most accessible, inclusive, working-class sports in Britain. It's a sport where everyone's welcome, where the crowd is as much a part of the spectacle as the players, where the atmosphere is all about having a good time. And if that crowd is turning on you, if they are using their platform to collectively express their disdain, then you're not just unpopular with a fringe group. You're unpopular with the mainstream. Now, let's talk about the rumors swirling around Westminster, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. There are whispers, increasingly loud whispers, of in-party insurrection. Labour MPs are reportedly growing restless. Some are concerned that Starmer's achievements aren't cutting through to the public. Others are worried that the party is repeating the mistakes of previous Labour governments, focusing too much on messaging and not enough on material improvements to people's lives. There's a sense, rightly or wrongly, that Starmer is all style and no substance. That is brilliant at looking prime ministerial, but less brilliant at actually governing. And when your own MPs are starting to question your leadership, when backbenchers are grumbling to journalists about the direction of the party, that's when a prime minister's position becomes genuinely precarious. The comparison to Boris Johnson is particularly telling. Johnson was forced out not because he lost a general election, but because his own party turned on him. His approval ratings tanked. His MPs decided he was an electoral liability, and he was gone. Now, Starmer's in a slightly different position because Labour has a huge parliamentary majority. He's not at immediate risk of losing a vote of no confidence. But politically, the trajectory is worrying. If his ratings continue to plummet, if Labour starts losing by-elections, if those Darts chants become representative of broader public sentiment, then his MPs will start to panic. And panicking MPs do unpredictable things. They start briefing against the leadership. They start positioning themselves for a potential contest. They start asking whether the party would be better off with someone else at the helm. And let's be brutally honest here, Starmer isn't exactly a charismatic figure. He's competent, certainly. He's serious. He's loyally, but is not inspiring. He's not the kind of politician who sets hearts racing or imagination soaring. He's the kind of politician you vote for because he's the safe option, the sensible choice, the grown-up alternative. But when the safe option starts to feel like the wrong option, when competence without charisma starts to look like just boring ineffectiveness, then people stop giving you the benefit of the doubt. And right now, the British public has stopped giving Starmer the benefit of the doubt. They are not waiting patiently for things to improve. They are chanting about him at the Darts. There's also a generational element to this. Starmer came to power promising change, promising to fix the mess left by years of Conservative government. Young people, in particular, had high hopes. They wanted action on climate change, on housing, on job security. They wanted a government that actually gave a damn about their future. And so far, they're not seeing it. The promised changes haven't materialized. The cost of living is still crushing. Opportunities still feel limited. And that disillusionment is dangerous because young voters are the ones who can swing elections. They are the ones who can energize campaigns or stay home and doom them. And if they've decided Starmer's just another disappointing politician, then Labour's in serious trouble. But perhaps the most damning thing about these Darts chants is what they represent, a complete breakdown in the relationship between the government and the governed. People are supposed to respect their leaders, even if they disagree with them.